You're tuning into the pro-black perspective on KWAZ Radio. Take the Bitter Medicine podcast, and of course the Revolutionary Matron. As we continue with this deep reading of the Wretched of the Earth, we're on episode 10 of 20. We're halfway through, and so far it's been a pretty damn good book. I mean, good for historical value. I think the theoretical value isn't necessarily like it needs to definitely be adjusted, but for historical value, this is pretty impressive because, as you might have picked up yesterday, the whole Pan-Africanism versus chauvinism description or dialogue that's been, you know, that's expressed in today's American movements. We see that it was present and recurrent in this colonial system. So I'm really thrilled to continue, and thank you again for joining me. Some of these episodes are long. I'm not going to front. Some of these episodes have a lot of, diversions. Not going to front. But we're working through this book, and that's the way we do it, Sometimes when you're reading a book, you gotta just take a moment for yourself and really study. Either way, let's kick into it. Page 108. It says, on the scale of the continent, this religious tension can take the shape of the crudest form of racism. Africa is divided into a white region and a black region. The substitute names of sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa are unable to mask this latent racism. So you already see, he's calling Africa racist for this religious difference. He's calling Africans racist for black and a white Africa. And, we're just going to kick right into it. The substitute names of sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa are unable to mask this latent racism. In some places, you hear that white Africa has a 1,000-year-old tradition of culture, that it is Mediterranean, an extension of Europe, and is part of Greek and Roman civilization. Black Africa is looked upon as a wild, savage, uncivilized, and lifeless region. In other places, you hear day in and day out of hateful remarks about veiled women, polygamy, and the Arabs' alleged contempt for the female sex. The aggressiveness of all these remarks recall that those so often attributed to the colonists. The national bourgeoisie of each of these two major regions, who have assimilated to the core the most despicable aspects of the colonial mentality, take over from the Europeans and lay the foundation for a racist philosophy that is terribly prejudicial to the future of Africa. Though its apathy and mimicry, it encourages the growth and development of racism that was typical of the colonial period. It is hardly surprising that in a country which calls itself African, to hear remarks that are nothing less than racist and to witness paternalistic behavior bitterly reminiscent of Paris, Brussels, or London. So that's actually pretty interesting. He's basically saying, and see, this is the thing, this is the issue actually. So basically, the colonists come around and they say Africa is savage, like black Africa is savage, wild and uncivilized, and white Africa is veiled women, polygamy, and contempt for the female sex. And then when you're not white and you say the same thing, you're considered a racist just for saying the same thing as this white person. But what if some parts of Africa would be wild? What if some parts of Africa were lifeless or uncivilized or what have you? And by uncivilized, like I said, hunter-gatherers would be considered, depending on their perspective, it would be considered uncivilized insofar as that word signifies mostly civilization, but civilization in the sense of not being like kind of agricultural economy, that's what it kind of signifies, so Greco-Roman civilization or Kemetu civilization, those are not necessarily hunter-gatherers, but you could see how somebody would say that, people who are just hunting for animals day in and day out, without any preserves of animals, but just literally surviving, that is distinct and different. And of course, the veiled women, they do have veils. Polygamy, they do have polygamy. And contempt for the female sex, patriarchy, as the white people would call it. But it's like common across the whole Greco-Roman world. It's common across the Arab world. It's common across the entire Abrahamic, or should I say Aryan religion world. So, like saying that this is racism and you sound like a British person, the reality is that it's literally in the text. Like you pick up I guess the Christians call it the Old Testament, but you pick it up and you have this story of women being cursed to periods and women being the ribs of men, and women must be subservient to men. And yeah, the contempt for female sex is just ever present. It's not like it's not racist to point out the obvious, because it's the obvious. Having a different culture is not a shame. So we're gonna look in the chat though. We have Kofi saying greetings, Bit of Medicine Podcast, greetings family, and Revolutionary Matron saying greetings fam. So make sure you guys check out those podcasts as well as the Harsh Reality podcast. And of course, greetings to everybody. Greetings to everybody, and thank you for joining me today. So in certain regions of Africa, bleeding paternalism towards blacks and the obscene idea drawn from Western culture that the black race is impermeable to logic and science reign in all their nakedness. There are some places where black minorities are confined to in semi-slavery, which justifies the caution, even distrust, that the countries of black Africa manifest toward the countries of white Africa. So black minorities are confined into semi-slavery, which justifies the caution. See, he's saying, in certain regions of Africa, bleeding paternalism towards black, an obscene idea drawn from the Western culture that the black race is impermeable to logic. He's saying that in some places of Africa, black people are confined to slavery. It's a semi-slavery. And he says that justifies the caution, even distrust, that countries of black Africa manifest to the countries of white Africa. And it's like, how like, this is the problem with the socialists, to be honest. Like, they're so light on quote-unquote white Africa. Like, they're so light on white Africa. And yet, like, what? Like it doesn't even make any sense. You're like, oh, yeah, well, they are enslaving us, so maybe there's a little reason for us to distrust them. Like, what? Anyway, it's not unusual for a citizen of black Africa walking in a city of white Africa to hear children call him the N-word, or to find the authorities speaking to him in pidgin. Dang. Okay, so a pidgin would probably be like, because I don't know if they say the N-word per se, because again, this is like a French translation. So pidgin is basically like broken down English, slang, Ebonics, I guess you call it in America. But yeah, so he's like, the authorities would just talk to black folk in Ebonics as if whatever. Unfortunately, alas, it is all too likely that students from black Africa enrolled in schools north of Sahara will be asked by their schoolmates whether people live in houses in their home country, whether they have electricity, and if their family practices cannibalism. Unfortunately, alas, it is all too likely that in certain regions north of the Sahara, Africans from the south will encounter fellow countrymen who beg them to take them anywhere there are blacks. Wait a second. Alas, it is too likely that in certain regions north of Sahara, Africans from the south will encounter fellow countrymen who beg them to take them anywhere there are blacks. Likewise, in certain newly independent states of black Africa, members of parliament, even government ministers, solemnly declare that the dangers lies not in a reoccupation of their country by colonial power, but a possible invasion by Arab vandals from the north. And of course, see, because again, he's a misogynist. He's in Algeria. He's in white Africa. He's giving this perspective, but he's giving this perspective that's pro-Arab, pro-Islam. He's giving it because he's like a misogynist. Like I said, like the misogynist, the socialism, all that adds up to the point where all of a sudden, he's just like, there's no threat from the Arabs. The Arabs don't want to expand, but they expanded already. You understand? They expanded already. That's how they're in North Africa. And this is actually pretty interesting, but it's called settler colonialism. They settled in Africa and took it over. They settled in North Africa and took it over, and now we call it white Africa, or Fanon does. This is a problem. This is the mentality that we're met with, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? That's the question. I'm glad I'm finally reading this book. And like I said, I'm glad I'm reading this book 10 years after it was recommended to me. Because if I had read it 10 years ago, I might have been some crazy ass socialist. because this seems convincing if you don't know better. And a lot of people, if you're not prepared better, and a lot of people might not be. That's why I recommend you go read the books to get your preparation. But as I said, as we have seen, the inadequacies of the bourgeoisie are not restricted to economics. Achieving power in the name of a narrow-minded nationalism, in the name of the race, and in the spite of its magnificently worded declarations totally void of content, irresponsibly wielded phases straight out of Europe's treatises on ethics and political philosophy, the bourgeois prove itself incapable of implementing a program with even a minimum humanist content. When it is strong, when it organizes the world on the basis of its power, bourgeoisie does not hesitate to maintain a pretense of universal democratic ideas. An economically sound bourgeoisie has to be faced with exceptional circumstances to force it to disregard its humanist ideology. Although fundamentally racist, the Western bourgeoisie generally manages to mask this racism by multiplying the nuances, thereby enabling it to maintain intact its discourse on human dignity in all its magnanimity. The Western bourgeoisie has erected enough barriers and safeguards for it to fear no real competition from those it exploits and despises. Western bourgeoisie racism toward the N-word and the towel head is a racism of contempt, a racism that minimizes. But the bourgeois ideology that proclaims all men to be essentially equal manages to remain consistent with itself by urging the subhuman to rise to the level of Western humanity that it embodies. So he's describing how Western racism operates, and he's saying that the Western racism minimizes, but they also at the same time proclaim that all men are essentially equal, and therefore they urge the people who were considered subhuman to rise to Western humanity. And you kind of see that in that duality in the African personality in America, where the African is either very either values Western values, deeply and at their core, or they embrace a subhuman, self perspective. So they look at themselves as subhumans. They look at themselves as naturally violent or inclined to violence or inclined to crime. They look down on themselves, and that's actually pretty interesting. Obviously, the quote unquote Pan-Africanists or the black nationalists, they may try to, say, oh no, we're going to value Africa as African. But of course, I'm going to continue to urge that you have to be serious about nationalism and say to yourself whether or not being in this other country is what it is that you want to do. So, actually, let me check on my. Let's remember I had something to look at. Oh, okay. All right. So the racism of the young national bourgeoisie is a defensive racism. Racism based on fear. Basically, it does not differ from common tribalism or even rivalry between clans or confraternities. It is easy to understand why perspicacious international observers never really took the lofty speeches on African unity very seriously. The flagrant flaws are so numerous that one clearly senses that all these contradictions must first be solved before unity can be achieved. So he's saying again that, and this is actually really important, this is actually pretty critical, that African unity, as we talk about it, like what's interesting is that you do have leaders who talk African unity. They talk African unity, but again, there's no real substantive transformation on an organizational level to truly have that African unity. And what's more, as he points out, the people are not necessarily so geared toward African unity. It's a good idea among a handful of people, but it is a difficult one to execute, and fundamentally that execution is being neglected far and wide. You have your exceptions, obviously, Arikana, she's a great one today, but like she has this organization for diasporal. Outside of like rare examples like that, it's mostly going to be speeches on black unity and African unity, and it's not going to be, it shouldn't be taken too seriously because it's easier said than done, right? Revolutionary Matron says she's behind and timing out. Sheesh. Just hit the live button whenever you feel like you're timed out. I mean, you'll skip across, but at least you'll get back in timing. The people of Africa have recently, or you could just join the Discord and listen live. Chip in if you want. Let me actually just leave that comment. Let me just. All right, so I definitely misspelled uninterrupted, but it's all good. The peoples of Africa have recently discovered each other, and in the name of the continent have decided to pressure the colonial regimes in a radical way. The people of Africa have recently discovered each other, and in the name of the continent have decided. The national bourgeoisie, however, who in region after region are in a hurry to stash away a tidy sum for themselves and establish a national system of exploitation, multiply the obstacles for achieving this utopia. The national bourgeoisie, perfectly clear on the objectives, are determined to bar the way to this unity. This coordinated effort by 250 million people to triumph over stupidity, hunger, and inhumanity. This is why we must understand that African unity can only be achieved under pressure and through leadership by the people, i.e., with total regard for the interest of the bourgeoisie. So again, this is actually where it's a little bit complicated. This is why the socialist rhetoric is really, it's really attractive, but it's not too practical, because you do not have examples. There's a reason why you don't have examples of people uniting under the leadership of the people, because it's logistically impractical. What is it that 1 million people want? And do 1 million people really, truly want to lead? Can 1 million people lead? That's the question. Wait, sorry. Let me say it this way. Can 1 million people lead 1 million people? That's the question. Even if you go into a group of 5 people, you say, can 5 people lead 5 people? And in some instances, it will work. To some degree, it will work. But would it be as effective as one person leading 5 people? No. You understand? Would it be as effective as one person leading 5 people? No. There's a logistical reason for this, and that's what it is. Now you could say, hey, what about 5 people being led by one goal? Goals are abstract. Goals are not necessarily leadership. Goals can be misinterpreted and interpreted differently depending on the circumstance, depending on the positioning, depending on the framing. If 5 people, let's say it this way, you have 5 people, 5 different areas on a battlefield, right? Each of them sees a different thing. And I think I actually gave this example in another podcast. I can't remember where. But, you have 5 people. Let's say you have 5 people on 5 locations on a map. To the east is a horde of enemies. To the west is a field of flowers and whatever, right? To the south is just water or whatever, and to the north is let's say hiding spaces, sure, and in the middle is just a mountain, right? Now here's the thing: if you're looking eastward, right, you see a bunch of enemies showing up, right? Your idea is then to surrender, right? You're like, oh, there's too many enemies to fight, let's surrender, right? To the west, however, your idea is, hey, let's start farming. Let's say it's a field of whatever. You're like, hey, let's build up our economy. To the north is just a bunch of hiding spaces, and you're like, well, there's no real danger, so what's the point of hiding? To the south is just water. You probably just enjoying the beach, whatever, right? Now again, remember, there's enemies coming in from the east, right? But now if you're in the middle, let's say, if you're in the middle, you can see the enemies. You're in the mountains or whatever. You can see the enemies from the east, and you can see the hiding spaces on the west, right? And instead of surrendering like the person to the east would say, or instead of farming like the person to the west might say, or instead of fishing like the person to the south may say, right? You go up north and hide. You understand? And that's why you would that's the reason why you'd position the leader in the best place. But moreover, that's the reason why you can't be led by 5 people, because if the 5 of them show up and they say, hey, look, I'm totally convinced we got to surrender. Other one's like, I'm totally convinced we got to go farming. I'm totally convinced. Like, you end up with a dispute. Now, you could debate it, but they don't all act with the same information. Now, the person in the best position will have the best information, absolutely. But that's why you have that leadership. You understand? Like, it comes back to the easiest solution. It comes back to what they call in science Occam's razor. I shouldn't even say that because it's like a white boy. But basically, it just comes back to, sometimes the easiest solution is the right one. Actually, that was a pretty good one. Somebody clip that. No, I'm joking. Anyway, but people in Africa have recently discovered, the national bourgeoisie, they're stealing, so on and so forth. And you want to, it's understand African unity can only be achieved under the pressure and leadership by the people. But again, the people, he's already pointed out that the people are chauvinistic. The people are ADOS. You understand? ADOS saying, leaving African unity up to ADOS is already dumb. You understand? And it's not just like ADOS. It's more so like this is everywhere in Africa. Like, in South Africa right now, you have people who are actually attacking Africans from other countries, who are burning businesses of Africans from other countries. There's no African unity achieved through the people. Now, obviously, there is this idea that you should, educate people for what it is. But you also have to realize that if you do not standardize that education, even the educated people will sound very distinct. You understand? If you don't educate the people, then even the educated people will sound very distinct. Because at this moment, we have educated people who are talking nonsense, who are talking crazy. Very smart, intelligent people talking nonsense and crazy. But, I digress. So the national bourgeoisie also proves incompetent in domestic politics and institutionally. In a certain number of underdeveloped countries, the parliamentary rules are fundamentally flawed, economically powerless, unable to establish coherent social relations based on the principle of class domination. The bourgeoisie chooses what seems to be the easiest solution, the single-party system. It does not possess as yet that ease of conscience and serenity that only economic power and control of the state system can give it. It does not establish a reassuring state for the citizen, but one which is troubling. Instead of inspiring confidence, assuaging the fears of its citizens, and cradling them with its power and discretion, the state, on the contrary, imposes itself in a spectacular manner, flaunts its authority, harasses, making it clear to its citizens that they are in constant danger. The single party is the modern form of the bourgeois dictatorship, stripped of mass makeup and scruples, cynical in every aspect. Such a dictatorship cannot, in fact, go very far. It never stops secreting its own contradictions, since the bourgeoisie does not have the economic means both to ensure its domination and to hand out a few crumbs to the rest of the country. So busy it is lining its own pockets, not only as fast as it can, but also in the most vulgar fashion. The country sinks ever deeper into stagnation, and in order to hide their stagnation, to mask this regression, to reassure itself and give itself cause to boast, the bourgeoisie has no other option but to erect imposing edifices in the capital and spend money on so-called prestige projects. So, again, he's condemning, this is just, standard fare. He's condemning the national bourgeoisie, the national leaders of neocolonialism. And, for good reason. Obviously, we're no friends of the Askari either. This is one of the few things that we're going to agree with. Now, but you have to also understand the context and the context of the Askari leadership, They have been miseducated in Europe, and they have been taught by the European education to want European values, European things. Now, if you like European values, but you are in China, right, then you will want to spend your money accordingly to get those European values. You understand? Now, you're not in China, you're in Africa. Okay? It's even more difficult. You need to steal more. You can't earn a proper living like you could in China with its better leadership, in a sense. You have to be that better leadership, but you aren't. The better leadership comes about through years of education, years of preparation. You don't have that. You were dependent one moment and independent the next. You understand? or you're from a village where you were just whatever, there is a need. I'm gonna keep telling you this. There's a need to transform this planet, to transform your livelihood, transform your country, and we have to encounter it. We have to stand forth and encounter it. All right. Just checking the chat. All right. Make sure you guys drop some likes, although I see you already did. But all right. The national bourgeoisie increasingly turns its back on the interior, and then, by the way, what he calls interior is like the rural area, So basically he's talking about the urban area versus the rural area. So they turn his back on the interior, on the realities of a country gone to waste, and looks toward the former metropolis and the foreign capitalists who secure its services. Since it has no intention of sharing its profits with the people or of letting them enjoy the rewards paid by the major foreign companies, it discovers the need for a popular leader whose dual role will be to stabilize the regime and perpetuate the domination of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeois dictatorship of an undeveloped country draws its strength from the existence of such a leader. We know that in developed countries, the bourgeois dictatorship is the product of the bourgeoisie's economic power. In the undeveloped countries, however, the leader represents the moral force behind which the gaunt and destitute bourgeoisie of the young nation decides to grow rich. It's really interesting, though. He doesn't mention any assassinations just yet, but Wazungu tends to murder people who do not go along with this national bourgeoisie he's describing. Now, of course, you can protect yourself from being murdered, obviously. But of course, if the person that you hire to protect you is also a mercenary who wants money by any means, your protection may be pretty limited. But yeah, he's he doesn't mention this, but this is what they want, and I just want you to understand why they would want it. If you can operate another country for pretty damn cheap, for cheaper than you can operate in your own country, and for safer than you can operate in your own country, and for cheaper as well, obviously, right? Then that's what you want to do. And that's what you can do when you're in Africa. You don't have to spend this $15 an hour minimum wage like you do in America. You could do $1 an hour for the same work. You understand? For the same work. And the country, if the bourgeoisie there, if the country, the leadership there says, I don't mind if you're spending $1 an hour as long as I get my cut. As long as I get, my 1,000, or my 10,000, right? Then go for it. I don't care. And it kind of reminds me of this idea that, people are like, hey, Africans didn't sell Africans to slavery or something, right? And, people are always like, well, no, we didn't. It was blah, blah, blah. And then somebody points out, they said, no, I mean, if, you don't consider the leader, the chief doesn't consider the peasant his people, or he doesn't consider another people his people, like across ethnic lines. The reality is this, that the bourgeoisie, if we're to look at it that way, then the bourgeoisie, it's not a question of whether Africans had sold Africans into slavery, because to this day they're selling Africans into slavery. To this day they're selling Africans into exploitation. So it's not a question of whether this happened, it's happening. The people who for years have seen him or heard him speak. Now, I'll tell you guys this, because I don't usually watch, I'll tell you this. I don't usually watch Rachel Maddow, at one point I decided to put her on because something was going on in the election, and I just wanted to know what's going on in the election. And that's the thing that I was telling, even Revolutionary Matron, but I'm telling people that, sometimes when something happens in the news, people want to look up and figure out, they want to hear from somebody that they figure is, reliable or has a viewpoint that they like to, whatever, right? So something happens in the news and I'm like, let me put on Rachel Maddow. Not because I value this lesbian or whatever, right? But more so it was like, I knew it was some Democrat stuff and I just wanted to know, what was the Democrat thing? I don't know. Long story short, though, she's talking about something going on in Africa, right? something going on in Africa where this oil company is trying to, is trying to make way into this African country, right? There's this African dictator who like uses tanks and military violence against his own people, right? I think the United States. I think what happened was that I think it was a big story actually. It's a big story. So there was this oil exec who was supposed to like take over some sort of department in I think the Trump administration, right? And so Rachel Maddow does like a background check of this guy. And it turns out that like originally the United States government is like this African government is asking for, oil. This African government is asking for, it's trying to sell its oil, right? It's oil. And the Americans say, like the American government is like, oh yeah, we would do that if you have certain civil rights things in place. If you have certain humanitarian things in place, if you build schools, if you use the money and some of the money you use to build schools or some of the money you use to build hospitals, some of the, it's just to develop your economy here, right? And then this oil exec offers more money, right? And says, we don't care what you do with this money. If you want to buy weapons, go ahead, right? And like we see you express interest in weaponry, we don't care, go ahead and buy more weapons, right? And so they buy out the Americans like that. And so the outrage was that this person was going to join the Trump administration or whatever. But it's just an interesting story because, when I say, these national bourgeoisie, sell out the people or whatever, like that is it. When it comes to Liberia with Firestone, they knew what Firestone was. They knew that Firestone was going to pay the Liberians nothing. But even if you go to Liberia, Liberians, these are the descendants of, the quote unquote ADOS, but the descendants of American slavery or whatever, they were enslaving the natives in Liberia. Like to the point where they wouldn't even carry an umbrella. No, carry a parcel. Like I think the gentleman from the UNIA ordered khaki. He ordered khaki. And khaki and yard, in order to make pants. So he had like 6 yards of it or something like that. And he was gonna walk out the store after getting his package or whatever. And the other Liberian, said to him, the American Liberian said to him, no, you can't be seen walking and holding your own package. That's what we have slaves for, And he got like a little native boy to carry it. So it's like, that's what you're faced with, and the question of, well, yeah, if Firestone comes and says, hey, we want people to work and get this rubber and it's going to be costly and, you might lose a life, you might lose some lives. It's kind of dangerous, but it's whatever. They say, sure, send a native. And if you want to pay them $1, I don't give a shit. Just give me some more money. That's what it is. That's life. And I will continue. So the people who for years have seen him or heard him speak, who have followed from afar in a kind of dream, the leader's tribulations with the colonial powers, spontaneously placed their trust in this patriot. Before independence, the leader, as a rule, personified the aspirations of the people: independence, political freedom, and national dignity. But in the aftermath of independence, far from actually embodying the needs of the people, far from establishing himself as the promoter of the actual dignity of the people, which is founded on bread, land, and putting the country back into their sacred hands, the leader will unmask his inner purpose to be the CEO of the company of profiteers composed of the national bourgeoisie, intent only on getting the most out of the situation. Yeah, of course. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. But what did you expect? And it's not to say that independence is a bad thing, but you have to formulate a different system. And you cannot formulate a system if your whole paradigm is pretending to play the Cold War. Whether you're looking at the capitalist or socialist mannerism, whatever economy you think you're doing, you will always end up the CEO of the company of profiteers, because essentially those two systems are exactly that. That's what they are. Honest and sincere though he may often be, in objective terms, the leader is the virulent champion of the now combined interests of the national bourgeoisie and the ex-colonial companies. His honesty, which is purely a frame of mind, gradually crumbles. The leader is so out of touch with the masses that he manages to convince himself they resent his authority and question the service he had rendered to the country. The leader is a harsh judge of the ingratitude of the masses and every day a little more resolutely sides with the exploiters. He then knowingly turns into an accomplice of the young bourgeoisie that wallows in corruption and gratification. The economic channels of the young state become irreversibly mired in a neo-colonialistic system. Once protected, the national economy is now literally state-controlled. The budget is funded by loans and donations. The heads of state themselves and government delegations make quarterly visits to the former metropolis or elsewhere, fishing for capital. So, yeah, that's what it is. The loans and donations. The budget is funded by loans and donations. You have to realize that you never developed an economy. If you never developed an economy, you will be poor. And see, I pointed this out before because, some people say, Oni, why are you writing? No, nobody actually asked. But once upon a time, I didn't write any books. I wrote articles, So I have like 500 articles on my website, right? And I write these articles, and then I turn around, I see this other brother writing an article, right? He wrote a book. Now, this brother wrote a book, but it's like that woman bashing stuff. Like, it was hateful and hurtful. But at the end of the day, he had a book and I didn't, And I said to myself, if we're really talking buy black and black economics and so on and so forth, then we should have a product. You should have a product if you're talking about black economics. Because there's this image of this like Arab guy, standing on a corner behind one of them boxes or whatever, right? Not boxes, food trucks. He's in a food truck and he's selling food. And then next to him is these black people dressed up in costume, probably black Israelites or something, but, just dressed up in costume. And they're, just spitting knowledge or whatever. And the caption was something along the lines of, the one's talking and the other one's doing, And so I said to myself, look, I got to write this book. I got to write these books. I got to sell something, if I'm really about economics. The issue is this. You go to any country in Africa, really. Ask yourself, what do they sell? Because I could tell you what Japan sells. I could tell you what America sells. I could tell you what China sells. Can you tell me what Togo sells? Can you tell me what Rwanda sells? Can you tell me what Nigeria sells? Can you even tell me what Jamaica sells? If these people are not selling, but only buying, then of course they can't survive that way. They're going to have to do loans and donations. This is the issue. This is the issue without having a proper black political perspective. And this is why, actually, honestly, I was trying to get my book out to, more to a wider crowd, a wider audience, because you're not going to make it if you don't readjust your behavior. So that's a pretty important conversation. Too bad, just a few of us are listening, right? Bit of Medicine Podcast says that's life. And Kofi says, what is the name of your website? The name of our website is the AfricanBloodSiblings.wordpress.org. AfricanBloodSiblings.wordpress.org. And .com. But like it's old now. I stopped updating it. I'm doing podcasts now. You know what I mean? So I just put the podcast up there. Bit of Medicine Podcast says we cannot tell you what those African countries sell. You can't. You know what I mean? I don't know. And like occasionally, something happens in Africa and you're like, oh, cool, the first African cell phone or oh, look, an African car, But damn well, like first off, the first one happening within 5 years from now, like 5 years, like, come on. Like there is so much more that can be done, so much more that should be done, and it's not being done. And we're playing around. we're playing around. The former colonial powers, multiple. In fact, I should tell you this, guys. I'll tell you this. It's come to joke. I almost want to not tell you, but I got this phone. I think it's from. Nah, let me not even. All right, but the point is, yeah, you really we're really behind, and I'm telling you, I am convinced the way forward is us coming together with some better knowledge than we've already come together with. I would say a part of that is my book, because it is that nice perspective that we don't usually have, right? But we really need to step up because it's getting insane and ridiculous at this point. This man wrote this book 50 years ago. You understand? We've been reading this book for 50 years. Sorry, 60 years ago. We've been reading this book for 60 years. This was like a required reading in the Black Panther Party. You understand? This is highly praised. This is, so on and so forth. We can't be in the same damn position. Okay? Something's wrong. Something's wrong. In fact, I want everybody, come on. Y'all need to go share the video. Share the video with somebody. Hit up your family. Hit up your family and be like, yo, check this out. All right. The former colonial power multiplies, or even just your mans. Your mans or your confidant. The person you chill with, person you talk with, person you bounce ideas off of. Send it to them. Let's not be in the same position for 100 years. Let's not do that. The former colonial power multiplies its demands and accumulates concessions and guarantees. And also I'll say this: if you want to share it later, you can share it later. And listen to it with them. Do that. Say, look, hey, I want to hang out. We want to hang out. Let's hang out. Let's do a virtual hangout. We're gonna listen to a lecture. That's it. I'll actually tell y'all this. One of my favorite dates in the past was the sister brought me to I went to the sister's place. And she showed me a Great and Mighty Walk. I didn't even know who John Henry Clark was at the time, But sister said, hey, I can't remember if I brought I think she showed me the documentary, But it was like a nice date, It was almost like, it was kind of like Netflix and chill before Netflix came around, It was like, you go to her place and you go watch a documentary together. You learn some history. Then, you could talk it out or you could, whatever. But anyway, or you can chill, right? Okay, now y'all not sharing it, right? All right. The former colonial power multiplies its demands and accumulates concessions and guarantees, taking fewer and fewer precautions to mask the hold it is over the national government, right? Fewer and fewer precautions to mask the whole. Yeah, the people stagnate miserably in intolerable poverty and slowly become aware of the unspeakable treason of their leaders. This awareness is especially acute since the bourgeoisie is incapable of forming a class. Its organized distribution for wealth is not diversified into sectors. It's not staggered and does not nuance its priorities. This new caste is an insult and an outrage, especially since the immense majority, 9/10 of the population, continue to starve to death. The way this caste gets rich quickly, pitilessly, and scandalously is matched by a determined resurgence of the people and the promise of violent days ahead. This bourgeois caste, this branch of the nation that annexes the entire wealth of the country for its own gain, true to its nature, but nevertheless unexpectedly casts pejorative aspersions about the other blacks or Arabs, which recall in more ways than one the racist doctrines of the former representative of the colonial power. It is both this wretchedness of the people and this dissolute enrichment of the bourgeois caste, the contempt it flaunts for the rest of the nation, that will harden thoughts and attitudes. Actually, this got me thinking right here. Real talk. This got me thinking. So all of us, when we're younger, we see these ads, that these white folk play of poor black kids in Africa, right? My question is this: if you are a leader in Africa, why would you allow these white journalists to show up in your country and promote that message? And I want to say it don't make much sense, but you know what? I'm going to take that back. I'll be honest with you. Because now that I think about it, you got black folk in the hood who poor and broke or whatever, and there's always a music video featuring people from the hood. Like, they happy to be there for some reason, Happy to be there to show off some new dance that don't make no damn sense, whether it's the Millie Rock or the chicken noodle soup or, watch me whip, watch me nay, so I mean, like, but that's but you see the difference with, I want to say this though, the difference between, the ghetto in America and the countries of Africa is that the countries of Africa technically have leadership. The ghettos of America don't. But the countries of Africa technically have leadership. So the question becomes, why in the world would you let somebody show up knowing full and damn well that they about to go all over the international news, all over every country, talk about how your people so broke. And of course, you well-to-do, you got money. But they going down to the little shanty town, and you like, yeah, it's all good. You could do that. It's interesting. It's interesting. What the game, what the con is, but it's interesting. Brother said cupcake. I've been wondering that too. Why let them display that? Yeah, like why are you letting people display that? Like you know what I'm saying? Like, you got all the stuff you can show on your country, and they going out to like the garbage heap, and they finding some kid, and you like, yeah, okay, sure, put that out in the world. For as little as a coffee a cup a day. And the thing is, you could afford a damn coffee cup. So like, come on. And you never even there. Like it's like you wouldn't even know these countries had leaders. You wouldn't even know these countries had presidents. And that's also another thing too, because like I don't watch international news, but I know that they talk about Biden. I know they talk about Biden like even in China. Like if something happens in America, they go back and be like, oh, this is under Biden or this is under Trump. Like if they show black people violence in America, they would then seek a comment from Biden or something. Show a comment from Biden. What these commercials, they act like these countries like that, like you just like Africa just like you wouldn't even know Africa had a leader. That part of the world had a leader. You wouldn't even know. It's crazy. Anyway, but the looming threat results in a strengthening of authority and the emergence of a dictatorship. The leader, with his militant past as a loyal patriot, constitutes a screen between the people and the grasping bourgeoisie because he lends his support to the undertaking of this caste and turns a blind eye to its insolence, mediocrity, and fundamental immorality. He helps to curb the growing awareness of the people. He lends his support to this caste and hides its maneuver from the people, thus becoming its most vital tool for mystifying and numbing the senses of the masses. Every time he addresses the people, he recalls his life, which was often heroic, the battles waged and the victories won in the people's name, thus conveying to the masses they should continue to place their trust in him. There are many examples of African patriots who have introduced into the cautious political struggle of their elders a bold nationalistic style. These men came from the interior, scandalizing the colonizer and shaming the nationalists in this capital. They proclaimed loud and clear their origin and spoke in the name of the black masses. These men who have praised the race, who were not ashamed of the past, its debasement and cannibalism, today find themselves, alas, heading a team that turns its back on the interior and proclaims that the vocation of the people is to fall in line always and forever. Now, of course, I'm reading this, I'm thinking of Mugabe, obviously, but that's what it is. Like a lot of African, and this is, this is the conflict you have. These are the people who fought for liberation of the country. Okay, these are the people who fought. If it weren't for them and the brave young men and women who put their lives on the line, right, there would be no freedom. There would be no decolonization. So do they have a role in the colonial government or do they have a role better than what they had before? Absolutely. They put themselves in the front. Okay, when you put yourself in the front, like think of it this way. In America, this is what happened. George Washington was a general. He was probably one of the better generals that they had. And then he was unanimously voted into office. And they would have given him a lifetime of service, except he stepped down. And it was unusual in that time for leaders to step down. But that's what it is. Like if you do your due diligence, you deserve some sort of reward, some sort of honor. Now, does that mean that you steal from the country? No, it doesn't. But I understand that if you have sat in the trenches, like even if we're being realistic, If you sit in the trenches and you're getting shot at and you're so on and so forth, and I come along and I'm like, hey, well, I think this will get better. Oh, why am I making fun of myself? All right. Usually I make a fake voice to make fun of somebody else. Right. All right. All right. That was a little, caught me off guard. But all right. But, you know, I come along and I'm like, hey, you know, this is what we should do. Blah, 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 blah. Right. I understand that people say, hey, look, this guy, he risked his life. You know, this is the concept I want you to understand. That as you're talking about, you know, having a better life in Africa, you got to ask yourself, what have you done? What have you done to deserve that better life in Africa? Because you saying to yourself, well, I deserve it because my people come from Africa. Yeah, what part of Africa? You know, even if you have a people that came from Africa, you did not own that much fucking land. Like, it's very unlikely that you own that much land. And if you did, that was 500 years ago, and that land has already been dispersed. You would have, but by over the amount of generations that passed, you still just have a little plot of land. If it were evenly dispersed at that time, you don't deserve all that much regardless. And it would have to be, if you're being very particular, in a particular damn African country. It's not around the freaking continent, right? So you can't rely on that. You have to, and of course, I would definitely say, hey, look, if you're black, you should get yours, you know, and if you're not black, you should get back, obviously. But after we go through that, we have to say to ourselves, now, what have you done individually? You understand? Because if this person got shot at and liberated the country, and you sat back and waited for it to be just right for you, you know, you sat back like Goldilocks, you know, this country is too dangerous, and this country is too, you know, whatever. If you sat back like that, right, then, yeah, I mean, look, I mean, if the people want to give you something, that's fine. That's fine. That's up to them. But if they don't, that's also fine. Makes a lot of sense. You understand? Because you got to earn your keep. You understand? You got to earn your keep. And so that's why I also promote that we have to be the pioneers. We have to go out and really earn our keep. So that way we can invite other people to earn their keep. You know, if you don't earn your keep and you just show up and say, hey, you know, everything looks pretty good, well, now it's time for some real leadership. It's like, well, where were you? The entire time we was leading this battle, you were sitting on the sidelines. We fought for 12 years. We fought for 10 years. We fought for even a day. And you weren't there. And now all of a sudden, when everything, all the dust is settled, all the dust is clear, you want to show up and be the commander. No. Nothing to work so. Nothing to go so. You know, you gotta prove yourself. So yeah. I think what do you say? Kofi says, I think they got paid to do it. Yeah, they probably did get paid to well, I mean, they should. I mean, I you know, some people ain't sending a cup of coffee with nothing. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. Like, you got child actors now, and that's what I'm saying. You have that same thing in Africa. I mean, you have the same thing in America because, like, you know, ain't nobody really dancing up in the, like, you walk to the hood, ain't nobody really dancing up in the streets in front of cameras like that. You know, like, and if they're doing it for free, let's I mean, maybe possibly, but it's still like, yeah, somebody's getting paid. You know what I mean? You just a backup. Yeah, somebody's getting paid. Obviously. Now, just getting paid to sit around and have bugs fly in your face, you know, with distended bellies, you know, it makes sense because you're hungry. But, like, I don't know why the leader. Oh, you said the leader getting paid. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is, probably. The leader pacifies the people years after independence and capable of offering the people anything of substance, capable of anything opening up their future, of launching the people into the task of nation building and hence their own development. The leader can be heard churning out the history of independence and recalling the united front of the liberation struggle. Refusing to break up the national bourgeoisie, the leader asks the people to plunge back into the past and drink in the epic that led to independence. The leader objectively places a curb on the people and desperately endeavors either to expel them from history or prevent them from setting foot in it. During the struggle of liberation, the leader roused the people and promised them a radical, heroic march forward. Today, he repeatedly endeavors to lull them to sleep and 3 or 4 times a year asks them to remember the colonial period and to take stock of the immense distance they have covered, you know? And it's true, you know? You're no longer the same. But the message says you must earn your keep, absolutely. We must point out, however, that the masses are quite incapable of appreciating the immense distance they have covered. The peasants who continue to scratch a living from the soil, the unemployed who never find a job, are never really convinced that their lives have changed, despite the festivities and flags, however new they might be. No matter how hard the bourgeoisie in power tries to prove it, the masses never manage to delude themselves. The masses are hungry, and the police commissioner, now Africans, are not particularly reassuring. The masses begin to keep their distance, turn their backs on, and lose interest in the nation which excludes them. So again, I want you to understand, it's actually not that easy to build an economy. This economic system that we see took many years and many lives and many abuses in Europe. Like what Marx is documenting, because, we go back to Marx, right? Because we're talking about socialism anyway, right? What Marx is documenting is this industrial system, the early industrial system of Europe, and how it was just brutal. Not as brutal as the slavery, obviously, but brutal in the sense of you could lose a limb in the working conditions. You could work for 10 hours. You could have children working day in and day out to make T-shirts and so on and so forth. You would have all of that, and that's what it costs. That's what it costs. Now, if you don't have that factory, if you don't build that factory, have that factory, so on and so forth, if you don't have that steel or build that steel, you're not going to have the same sort of, like you're not going to build the same kind of wealth that you want. You're not. You understand? And people are not really, they don't want to go to that era, and they don't even want to build their own factories. They don't want to build their own cars. Why would you want to build your own cars when you can get one from Germany? There was this video of this person, I think it was in maybe Cameroon, I don't know, but let's say it's Cameroon, and he's like 6 rows of cars back to back in deep traffic, right? Where'd they get all those cars from? And everybody's driving a car, so where'd they get all these cars from? Like the people want cars, they don't want to build cars, they want cars. How do you get cars? You have to buy them. How do you buy them? You need money. How do you get money? You need to sell your resources. Now, how do you milk cars? Well, you have to have engineers. You have to have assembly lines. You have to so on and so forth. And do you have those? No. Reimagining, rethinking an economy is more difficult than you would think. Because the people in you just got independence. The people are like, no, I want to have a car. I want to have a car. I want to get a car. That's what they want. They don't want to build the car. They're not demanding to build the cars. They're demanding to be able to purchase a car. They're demanding to be able to drive on the streets. The streets that were already there, or the paved roads, or the footpaths. Now I personally, if you were imagining a new economy, you might say, well, instead of cars, because of global warming and all that, you might say, well, let's just build a bunch of bikes. There's actually this white boy, I think he went to Africa. A white boy he went to Rwanda, in fact. And it's like Rwanda's building building bikes out of bamboo, Instead of metal, they're building bikes out of bamboo. And this is a white boy who's leading the process, and he's so on and so forth, right? But that's an idea as well, as to say, hey, we can use our locally sourced material. We have bamboo, it's strong. We can build this, this bike with minimal metal, if anything, right? And you'd engineer it, and you could obviously have roadways that are less congested. Now, of course, obviously bikes are not going to be a full substitute for cars, because cars can move objects, move items if you're really overloaded, as to say, like if you were moving a television or moving groceries, like a lot of groceries, you probably wouldn't do it on a bike. Or if you're moving children, you probably wouldn't be able to do that with a bike. So you have to think about that as well. But the obvious thing to say is that that is what's going on. You have people who are like, hey, let's just get cars, but they're not building them, and it's not as easy to build them, because you might not have the locally sourced material or the technology. A lot of times, if you just dismantle the system before you, it might not be the case that you can just build and rebuild. But of course, that's another conversation. The masses begin to keep their distance and turn their backs. Yeah. From time to time, however, the leader rallies his forces, speaks over the radio, and tours the country in order to reassure, pacify, and mystify. The leader is even more indispensable since there is no party. During the struggle for independence, there was in fact a party headed by the current leader. But since that period, the party has sadly disintegrated. Only the party in name, emblem, and motto remains. The organic party, designed to enable the free circulation of an ideology based on the actual needs of the masses, has been transformed into a syndication of individual interests. Since independence, the party no longer helps the people to formulate their demands, to better realize their needs, and better establish their power. Today, the party's mission is to convey to the people the instructions handed down from the top. That productive exchange between the rank and file and the higher echelon and vice versa, the basis and guarantee of democracy in a party, no longer exists. On the contrary, the party now forms a screen between the masses and the leadership. The party has been drained of life. The branches created during the colonial period are today in a state of total demobilization. Now, of course, what you want to do, the solution to this, I would say, is more ideological clarity. Without ideological clarity, you get into power and then you just do whatever you want. That's not that good. The militant is running out of patience. It is now we realize how he said we, all right, how we realize how right certain militants were during the liberation struggle. In fact, during the struggle, a number of militants asked the leading organization to elaborate a doctrine, to clarify objectives, and draw up a program. So that's the ideological clarity I was talking about, actually. But under the pretext of safeguarding national unity, the leaders categorically refused to address such a task. The doctrine they recorded was national unity versus colonialism. And on they forged, armed with only a fiery slogan for a doctrine, reducing any ideological activity to a series of variants on the rights of people to self-determination and the wind of history that would inevitably sweep away colonialism. When the militants asked that the wind of history be given a little more in-depth analysis, the leaders retorted with the notion of hope and the necessity and inevitability of decolonization, etc. So this is actually really important right here. This is actually pretty important. So he's saying that the leaders mobilize the people under something very basic and simple. And the militants, some of the militants were saying, no, it has to be more complicated. What are we fighting for? The reality is this. The national leader was right. And wrong. Right? Right because you, like for instance, I'll tell you this. There was this brother, he was in Nigeria actually. He showed me this political party doctrine. And the political party doctrine was, he showed me like this long political party doctrine. And it was pretty interesting. But it had so much pro-socialism in it, right? Or it had so much, unity between the ethnic groups and all that kind of stuff, which is, sometimes sounds good, sometimes doesn't. But it had so much of that, Nigeria first or whatever, right? I couldn't go along with it. You understand? A lot of people, you see the word socialism, you're like, no. You see the word Fulani, you're like, no. You see the word Igbo, you're like, no. You see the word Hausa, you're like, no. A lot of people are going to find a reason to not go along with something, and that's going to weaken you. Whereas if you, as a people, just say decolonization, they got nothing wrong about that. You understand? So the party, so the national leader is right, or the party leader is right in the sense of if you overcomplicate it, even though you want to do something better and you don't want to end up with, oh, this person won, right? Notwithstanding that, you have to keep it simple. Okay? You have to keep it simple because, and that's something that we as African nationalists have to also embrace in the sense of, you can't overcomplicate the message. You can't overcomplicate the message. It's almost like you want to just say black wealth, Now, of course, you're going to have people who are like, well, black wealth, what does that mean? Does that mean socialist wealth or blah, blah, and that's going to be it. So you have to even make it even simpler than that. Make it even more agreeable than that, as in, better opportunities for black people. But again, what does that mean? Like you really have to sit by and think about that. So that's actually something I would note for myself, moving forward into the future, which is that when you have your propaganda, right, what you want to do is, I can't highlight this. What you want to do if you have your propaganda is just make it palatable, All right, make it palatable. All right. So after independence, the party sinks. The party sinks into a profound lethargy. The only time the militants are called upon to rally is during so-called popular festivals, international conferences, and Independence Day celebrations. The local cadres of the party are alas heading a team that turns its back on the interior and proclaims that the vocation of the people is to fall in line always and forever. Oh, this is like a repeated page. I think so. Hold on a second. I do vaguely remember reading this. So it's to the 114, right? Yeah, see, it went back. What? You know you're reading carefully when you see that, right? 114, so that's 114 again. 115 again. 116. That's crazy. All right. So appointed to administrative jobs. The party itself becomes an administrative. So you know damn well the book boring when you're reading through it and you see the same damn page again. Well, I shouldn't say that because I think I might have made myself a few typos myself. Anyway, the local cadres of the party are appointed to administrative jobs. The party itself becomes an administration, and the militants fall back into line and adopt the hollow title of citizen. Of course. Well, again, like what do you expect? You know, what do you expect? Like you're a part of a new nation now, right? Now that they have fulfilled their historic mission of bringing the bourgeoisie to power, they are firmly asked to withdraw so the bourgeoisie can quietly fulfill its own mission. We have seen, however, that the national bourgeoisie of the underdeveloped countries is incapable of fulfilling any kind of mission. After a few years, the disintegration of the party becomes clear, and any observer, however superficial, can see for himself that the only role of the former party, now reduced to a skeleton, is to immobilize the people. The very same party which during the liberation struggle became the focus of the entire nation now decomposes. The current behavior of the intellectuals who on the eve of independence had rallied around the party is proof that such a rally at the time served no other purpose than to have their share of the independence cake. The party becomes a tool for individual advancement. Now, again, you know, it's actually pretty interesting. There's this video I decided to click on. It seemed pretty interesting. It was like this white boy is talking about, like he's like, you know how white people don't like white women. So, you know, anytime they could shut up a white woman, they show it off, right? So there's this video and they show like just a bunch of clips of them shutting up white women, I guess. But this white woman is saying something like, "How can an individual affect global warming?" And the white boy explains, well, if you improve yourself enough, eventually you can join the ranks of the leadership of your country. And in joining the ranks of the leadership of your country, then the leaders that you critique, you know, from the bottom, in a sense, you can impact the collective will as opposed to just rallying on the bottom for the collective will. You know, the thing is this, that you want you should want to be advanced. You know, what you do in that advancement, however, is really up to your education. And this is why, you know, like Revolutionary Matron stresses Ma'at and so forth, we have to broaden our attachment to our African spiritual systems and our African ethical values, as opposed to these Wazungu ethical values. You know, we have to expand that, and that will probably, and that might not be enough, but it'll be better, you know? And the reason I say it might not be enough is because, like I said, there's a situation of what do you do with this bourgeoisie, you know? Does your African ethical system attach you to, you know, the foreign bourgeoisie? Does it address that? And so, you know, you have to be a little more advanced. You have to take more into consideration. And that's really what it comes back to. Can we do that? So I think there are ways to do this. You know, I think there are ways to do this, but we really have to act on it. So inside the new regime, however, there are varying degrees of enrichment and acquisitiveness. Some are able to cash in on all sides and prove to be brilliant opportunists. Now, inside the new regime, however, there are varying degrees of enrichment and acquisitiveness. Some are able to cash in on all sides and prove to be brilliant opportunists. Favors abound, corruption triumphs, and morals decline. Varying degrees of enrichment and acquisitiveness. Some are able to cash in on all sides and prove to be brilliant opportunists. Favors abound, corruption triumphs, and morals decline. Today, the vultures are too numerous and too greedy, considering the meagerness of the national spoils, right? So the nation doesn't make that much, so people are more greedy and more so on and so forth. The party, which has become a genuine instrument of power in the hands of the bourgeoisie, reinforces the state apparatus and determines the containment and immobilization of the people. The party helps the state keep its grip on the people. It's increasingly an instrument of coercion and clearly anti-democratic. The party is unknowingly, and in some cases knowingly, the accomplices of the mercantile bourgeoisie. Just as the national bourgeoisie sidesteps its formative phase to revel in materialism, likewise, at the institutional level, it skips the parliamentary phase and chooses a national socialist type dictatorship. So, all right, it skips the institutional level, it skips the parliamentary phase and chooses a national socialist type dictatorship. We now know the short-sighted fascism that has triumphed for half a century in Latin America is the dialectical result of the semi-colonial state which has prevailed since independence. So that's pretty interesting. So, because I wasn't expecting a critique of socialism. So, yeah, so he's actually saying that these are anti-socialist. So the party helps to increasing an instrument of coercion and anti-reality. The party is unknowingly the compass of the mercantile bourgeoisie, just as the national bourgeoisie sidesteps its formative revel in materialism. Likewise, it's institutional. Yeah. So this is actually pretty interesting. But yeah, so national socialist type governments, that's what it is. Sometimes, so National Socialist, though, I think that's Nazi. So maybe he's not talking about socialism and just talking about, like, essentially, National Socialist really is like China. Like, a lot of the effective economies of the world do, in fact, are like this. The only issue is that you don't have good leadership. You know, you don't have good, far-reaching, far-looking leadership. And it's because we're continually miseducated from the West, whereas other people are not. They don't succumb to that. They don't succumb to Western loyalties like we do. And I'm telling you, we really do want to come back to our senses. You know, we really do want to come back to our senses because we're embarrassing ourselves on this planet. As a race, we are embarrassing ourselves on this planet. Let's see. Go back to this. In these poor, undeveloped countries where, according to the rule, enormous wealth rubs shoulders with abject poverty, the army and the police force from the pillars of the regime, both of which, in accordance with another, form the pillars of the regime, both of which, in accordance with another rule, are advised by foreign experts. You see that? The police are advised by foreign experts. The strength of this police force and the power of the army are proportional to the marasmus that afflicts the rest of the nation. The national bourgeoisie sells itself increasingly openly to the major foreign companies. Foreigners grab concessions through kickbacks, scandals abound. Ministers get rich, their wives become floozies. Members of the legislature line their pockets, and everybody, down to police officers and custom officials, join hands in this huge caravan of corruption. Facts. The opposition becomes more aggressive and the people are quick to latch on to its propaganda. Hostility towards the bourgeoisie is now manifest. The young bourgeoisie, which seems stricken by premature senility, ignores the advice proffered and proves incapable of understanding that it is in their own interest to veil, even slightly, its exploitation of the people. So basically the young bourgeoisie, the new bourgeoisie are exploiting the people and they're not even hiding their hands and people are getting outraged. And of course, you could probably tell that there's going to be a showdown soon, right? So the very Christian magazine La Semaine Africaine in Brazzaville addresses the barons of the regime thus: men in power, and you, their wives, today your wealth has afforded you comfort, education, perhaps a beautiful home, contacts, and many missions abroad that have opened up new horizons. But all your wealth has encased you in a shell which prevents you from seeing the poverty surrounding you. Beware. This warning from La Main Africaine, addressed to Mr. Yolu's lieutenants, is of course not a revolutionary in the least. What La Main Semaine Africaine wants to convey to those starving the Congolese people is that their God will punish them. If there is no room in your heart for the people under you, there'll be no room for you in the house of their God, right? It is obvious that the national bourgeoisie is a little troubled by such denunciations. Focused solely on Europe, it remains firmly resolved to get the most out of the situation. The enormous profits it makes from exploiting the people are shipped abroad. The young national bourgeoisie is very often more weary of the regime it has installed than are the foreign companies. It refuses to invest. They are more wary of the regime it has installed than are the foreign companies. It refuses to invest on home soil, and it remarkably, and see, that's saying they're not investing on home soil. That's the problem. and is remarkably ungrateful to the state that protects and feeds it. On the European stock exchanges, it buys foreign stocks and spends weekends in Paris and Hamburg. The behavior of the national bourgeoisie of certain undeveloped countries is reminiscent of members of a gang who, after every holdup, hide their share from their accomplices and wisely prepares for retirement. Such behavior reveals that the national bourgeoisie more or less realizes it will lose out in the long term. It foresees that such a situation cannot last forever, but intends making the most of it. Such a level of exploitation, however, and such distrust of the state inevitably triggers popular discontent. Under the circumstances, the regime becomes more authoritarian. The army thus becomes the indispensable tool for systematic repression. In lieu of parliament, the army becomes the arbiter. But sooner or later, it realizes its influence and intimidates the government with the constant threat of pronunciamento. As you have seen, the national bourgeoisie of certain underdeveloped countries has learned nothing from history. If it had looked closer at Latin America, it would have no doubt identified the dangers awaiting it. We thus arrive at the conclusion that the micro-bourgeoisie, despite all the fanfare, is doomed to make no headway. In the undeveloped countries, a bourgeois phase is out of the question. A parley's dictatorship or a caste of profiteers may very well be the case, but a bourgeois society is doomed to failure. The band of gilded profiteers grabbing banknotes against a background of widespread misery will sooner or later be a straw in the hands of the army, which is cleverly manipulated by foreign advisors. The foreign advisors, you see? Foreign advisors now are manipulating the army, right? Because people are getting discontented. There's going to be a riot. There's going to be activity. They don't want this. Foreign metropolis, therefore, governs indirectly both through the bourgeoisie it nurtures and the national army, which is trained and supervised by its experts to transfix, immobilize, and terrorize the people. Oh, snap. The few remarks we have made concerning the national bourgeoisie lead us to an inevitable conclusion. In the undeveloped countries, the bourgeois should not find conditions conducive to its existence and fulfillment. In other words, the combined efforts of the masses regimented by a party and of keenly conscious intellectuals armed with revolutionary principles should bar the way to this useless and harmful bourgeoisie. So again, this is like Marxism, this is Leninism, classical Leninism. That is, you form revolutionary cadres. So you see, I think he uses the word cadres here, right? No, party. You form revolutionary cadres. Those are basically, you have a political party and you train them to arm people with revolutionary principles of socialism, so on and so forth. Principles against the bourgeoisie. And again, yes, the bourgeoisie are a problem in a sense, but it's because these are the bourgeoisie. These are sellouts. These are sellouts. It's not so much that they are bourgeoisie as much as they are sellouts. Because the thing is that Wazungu has bourgeoisie too, but they're not sellouts, So Wazungu, it's like there's a distinct difference between being a sellout bourgeoisie and just a bourgeoisie. Looks like two people joined us, PC and Machiavelli. Peace, family. All right, so no, not yet, Shikari. All right, so the theoretical question which has been posed for the last 50 years when addressing the history of the undeveloped countries, i.e. whether the bourgeois phase can be effectively skipped, must be resolved through revolutionary action and not through reasoning. The bourgeois phase, so yeah, again, you have to resolve it through revolutionary action, that is fighting, violence, and not through reasoning. You can't reason with people that are, enjoying their time in Paris and Hamburg. And, and that's the thing, a lot of people, I just saw this recently, in fact. Somebody was like, hey, this person is enjoying medical care in another country instead of medical care in our country. And it's like, yeah, if you have money, you want the best medical care you can afford, And it's the same like here in New York, there is a hospital near me, But, all right, let's say, yeah, there's a hospital near me. But my neighbor, if my neighbor wants some really good medical treatment, they're going up to Manhattan. They're not going to just say, this is my local area, And even if and that's my neighbor, So I don't think my mayor or my, or the president or whatever, if they need medical treatment, that they're going to just go to their neighborhood hospital, They're going to go to the freaking best hospital they can find in the country, possibly in the world, And so I fully understand. I understand it. I understand why people might say it's a bad thing, obviously. But I also see why somebody, if you're looking at it from an individual perspective, why somebody would seek the best medical care they could, in the case of a medical emergency. Because even poor people do it, if they could, But anyway, the theoretical question, which has been posed for the last 50 years, so yeah, revolutionary action and not through reasoning. So like reasoning would be like, hey, you guys should go to the hospital near you, and if you're the president of this country, then you should go to the hospital in this country, and you can't go to any other. But it's like, yeah, if I want this particular surgery done, and I know the experts in another country can do this particular surgery better than the experts in this country, then that's probably what I'll do. If the world leading, hand surgeon or whatever, like hand reconstructive surgeon, plastic surgeon, whatever, is in another country, if I can afford it, that's where I'll go. Like it's common sense. So you can't reason somebody from, well, you should stay. I get it, but I don't get it. Like if you're really talking about individuals, if you're really talking about peoples and human beings, then yeah, a lot of people are not willing to gamble or risk their life. Like even think about this vaccine. A lot of people are not willing to do that, So it behooves us to think that people seeking medical care and being rich are not going to try a medical care that they have more faith in, A lot of faith is a huge part of the medical industry, but it is what it is. Revolutionary action and not through reasoning. The bourgeois phase in the underdeveloped countries is only justified if the national bourgeoisie is sufficiently powerful economically and technically to build a bourgeois society, to create the conditions for developing a sizable proletariat, to mechanize agriculture, and finally pave the way for a genuine national culture. So you see what he's saying. That's what I'm saying about socialists. I don't really understand socialists. Socialism is a continuation of capitalism. So you kind of see right here that he's like, he doesn't like the black bourgeoisie, who are just a bunch of thieves. But if they were able to create conditions for a sizable proletariat, expand the proletariat, mechanize agriculture, and pave the way for a genuine national culture, he's cool with them. So basically, he's cool with the bourgeoisie. He's cool with capitalism. And that's okay, I guess. But it's just kind of like contradictory. Because on the one hand, you would think to yourself, this guy is anti-capitalism. But on the other hand, you realize he just like his issue here really is that the leadership of Africa is not bourgeoisie. You understand? And like I said, Nyerere, if you look at my book of Power, you'll see that Nyerere kind of said the same thing. He said that the leaders of Africa, the elites of Africa in a sense, were mostly like rental and landowner. They didn't have the enterprising and entrepreneurial spirit that the white American bourgeoisie had, and so they were just kind of leeches as opposed to like innovators in a sense, But it is what it is, right? So, and of course, I'm not trying to compliment crackers. It's just, I'm just repeating what other people say. The bourgeoisie, which evolved in Europe, was able to elaborate an ideology while strengthening its own influence. Now, of course, I just want to articulate for people at home, you don't want this profit over people mentality that the bourgeoisie of Europe have, So like I said, the early conditions of industrial work in Europe, demanded, was very harmful, 10-hour work shifts, 12-hour work shifts, and you could possibly die with no compensation. It took a lot of unionizing and a lot of so on and so forth so that you wouldn't have to work, 6 days a week, so that you wouldn't have to work 12 hours straight. Instead you had, and it went down in America to 8 hours a week, 8 hours a day. But, in Europe, it's sometimes 3 hours or 4 hours a day. That took a lot though. It didn't start out that way, So even when you're quote unquote praising the development of bourgeoisie in Europe, you have to realize that it was harsh and brutal at one point. At one point, Karl Marx, who studies this thing, is like, the proletariat are worse off than the slave. He says that. I don't believe that, but he says that. And of course, his reasoning was that the proletariat owned nothing. Whereas, and they own nothing and they're owed nothing but wages, so they don't have, housing and food, guaranteed them. But of course, he's probably not familiar with slavery in the sense that, you might have had housing and food, but they could have taken your life at any point, So, and you were whipped and brutalized, like legit. So, he probably like I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's as bad or whatever, but it was bad, and that's a difference. So the bourgeoisie, which evolved in Europe, was able to elaborate an ideology while strengthening its own influence. This dynamic, educated, and secular bourgeoisie fully succeeded in its undertaking of capital accumulation and endowed the nation with a minimum of prosperity. In the undeveloped countries, we have seen that there are no genuine bourgeoisie, but rather an acquisitive, voracious, and ambitious petty caste dominated by a small-time racketeer mentality, content with the dividends paid out by former colonial power. This short-sighted bourgeoisie lacks vision and inventiveness. It had learned by heart what it has read in the manuals of the West and subtly transforms itself not into a replica of Europe, but rather its caricature. So, of course, it's going harsh on them. But again, you're romanticizing the accumulation of capital. The amount of people that were lost. Like the labor unions really transformed Europe. Now Europe is kind of decently the case. It's kind of decent. You kind of, some people do look at it with admiration and wish that such a system were in Africa. But, the initial costs were dramatic. Even in Russia, the initial costs of making these factories, a lot of people were worked to death, to make this happen. So, and that's just something to consider. So this is the last paragraph. The struggle, because we're stopping on page 120. The struggle against the bourgeoisie in the underdeveloped countries is far from being simply theoretical. It is not a question of deciphering the way history has judged and condemned it. The national bourgeoisie in the underdeveloped countries should not be combated because it threatens to curb the overall harmonious development of the nation. It must be resolutely opposed because literally it serves no purpose. Mediocre in its winnings, in its achievements, in its thinking, this bourgeoisie attempts to mask its mediocrity by ostentatious projects for individual prestige, chromium-plated American cars, vacations on the French Riviera, and weekends in neon-lit nightclubs. So there you have it. He's basically, as you would see, like I said about productive versus consumption, why I would write a book versus why, whatever. You have to be productive. You have to produce things. And if you're not producing things, if you're not productive, then you going out spending your money, spending money that you didn't earn, right, on things that you shouldn't have, right, does make you a parasite, does make you serve no purpose, does make you useless, does make you mediocre. Say what you will, because that's the thing. People critique, like we go back to this Jeff Bezos guy. Say what you will, Jeff Bezos does create a interesting service. Or say what you will, the guy of Mark Zuckerberg does create an interesting service. A useful service that is whatever, right? Obviously, he earns money through, selling your information, which is something he said he wouldn't do, whatever. But regardless, and that's like a bad thing, obviously. But regardless, you could see, well, that's theft, I would say. But you could see that where he gets his money. As we pointed out earlier, you don't even know what these people do. They are, you know what they do. They're begging foreigners to invest, or they're welcoming foreigners to do some extraction or whatever. And in so doing, they're using that money to go on vacations with these foreigners or to buy cars for these foreigners. They're not turning it into some sort of productive capability, some sort of product, some sort of produce, anything of the sort. What they're doing is just selling out the country piece by piece. And that is a thing that is in and of itself useless, and why you would oppose this particular class of individuals. We're going to end there. That's page 120. I thank everybody for joining me today. It is a nice deep reading. We're halfway through. We're on episode 10 of 20. So we got 10 more to go. And like I said, on the 17th of this month, expect to listen to that Marcus Garvey speech. It's not going to be on my channel for some reason, but that's how it is when you go on other people's channels. But, hopefully you guys check it out. If you aren't in my Discord, make sure you join. Click on the link below. If you are interested, make sure you check out Revolutionary Matron later today, I believe, at 6:30. And otherwise, until then, I'd Like to hear from you all another day. And of course, Shemiam Hotep. I gotta sign off quickly before you say that salami and bacon thing.